Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some job search problems. Your Law School Toolbox host is Alison Monahan, and typically, I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website, Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about some job search problems. Welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Well, let's jump right in. It's currently mid-spring, and I'm a 1L who does not have a summer job. I've sent out some applications. I've even had some interviews, and there are a few places I haven't heard back from, but I've gotten some rejections. I'm just not sure what to do now, and also what went wrong. Why haven't I gotten this taken care of?
Well, I would first tell you that you are not alone, and there are going to be a lot of people in the same boat. You know, there's going to be people that locked in the job early, but that's not most people. Most people kind of look as we get into spring, but you are getting to the point where you need to be, really putting your foot on the gas and trying to, step up the job search. I would say the number one problem that I think comes up in this situation is that you have not sent out enough applications. I think sometimes people kind of start sending them out and they feel like then they can take a break and wait to hear back. Or maybe they have heard back from some, so they feel like, oh, well, I'm waiting to see what's going to happen with these jobs. My opinion is you should never stop applying until you actually have the job. Even if you've had 2 rounds of interviews and it feels really positive, you don't know what's going to happen until you actually get the job. So I feel like a lot of the 1L job search is about, just a numbers game, that you need to send out so many applications to get, the final job. And not everyone has to, but I think you should go into it assuming that's what you have to do. So I would say that is probably the issue here, based on, the concern.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think people drastically underestimate how many applications this might take. I definitely remember when I was a 1L on December 1st, the very first day we were allowed to send anything, stuffing envelopes and literally in the mail at that point, and sending out over 100. And I think I got 1 interview from that and I don't think I even actually ever got a decision. I think I found another job first. But yeah, if you've sent 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, that's just probably not enough. And like you said, you need to keep sending them because you just really don't know. I think particularly, the economy is not bad, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think even I've heard outside of the legal context, a lot of friends who've gone through the job search process and everything looks great. And literally, the day before they're supposed to get the final offer, they call and say, actually, we've decided not to reopen the office, so we don't need you, that kind of thing.
I totally agree. I think things are kind of uncertain. I think that basically 1Ls get jobs for that first summer. A lot of them are unpaid. There's a lot of set 1L job spots available. So I do think there are jobs to be had, but it really is a numbers game. It's also about just casting a wide net. I think sometimes also people focus on, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to look for a job in that exact area. And that's great. That might be a possibility, but a lot of times it's not. You're just kind of getting these generic 1L spots, and that's fine. Like we've said before, you need a job. It should be legal related. It should be something where you get experience and, you move on, you talk about it in your 2L job search. That's going to be a lot more targeted. So I would also say, that's another issue, is just being too specific about what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have a job in the spring, then like you said, you really got to focus on this. And unfortunately, that's also, when your finals are coming up. But this would be a great opportunity to go to your career services office, let them know you're having some problems, tell them what you've done, ask for their help, because they may actually be getting notifications and emails and calls and things from people, particularly alumni, who actually want to hire. So they may be aware of opportunities that you haven't encountered yet, and they want you to get a job. Everyone wants you to have a job.
Absolutely. They're there to help you. Their job is to find you a job. So I would say, develop a good relationship with them. And I agree, really talk to them about where you are, because sometimes, people are sort of maybe embarrassed or feel some shame about where they are and that they don't have a job. And rather than, go for it and be open about it and talk to people, they sort of hide it. And that has like the opposite effect. That is never going to get you a job.
Right. And I think there can be some frustration around this too. Like, you're like, I just don't want to deal with this. I don't want to talk about it. I've done everything I possibly can, and I just it hasn't worked out. And like, the world hates me and no one's ever going to hire me. And I don't think that's a productive attitude.
Absolutely. I'd also say, don't have this idea in your head that there's like a point that's too late, or like feeling like everyone else has a job and it's whatever, April, May, and you still don't have a job. You need to be looking until you get a job, even if that means somehow it went into the summer and you're still trying to find something to do. Like, to me, the search isn't over till the summer is over and there's no time left to work. Right. So you should not be like ever just giving up on it. No,
that's a great point, because you could always just put summer 2022 on your resume and they're not going to ask you like what month you started.
Exactly. They're never going to know.
All right. Well, let's move on to a different question, because I think this was kind of pertinent to a lot of people either last year or this year. So due to the pandemic, I moved home and was doing remote school. I don't have the same on-campus connections, and I'm worried about finding a 2L job for next summer. How do you think people should approach, having maybe not had that full on-campus law school experience because of COVID?
Well, I think you're in the same boat as probably a lot of other people. I think there's some people who maybe stayed on campus, but a lot, went home or were living off campus and doing remote school. So I think it's a situation that everyone's sort of navigating together. And I think the advantage is, even though a lot more things are happening in person now, there's still a lot of resources online and remote activities and events and things like that. So I think there are lots of ways to still be involved on campus, even if you're currently away. And so I would say, try to find out what those are and get to know people. Again, career services, I think, is a great place to start, and then see what kind of networking events there are. I'd also suggest probably making a trip to campus, if that's possible for you, if you're still off campus, to try to maybe see if there's a way to talk to people in person. Sort of like we were saying before, I think sometimes you can get into this pattern with things and then feel like it's hard to change course and get to know people because it's been a while. But I would say kind of step out of your comfort zone and, make the effort, and kind of, you have to do it sometime. So I would say, try to do that, and even if it feels a little bit awkward.
Right. And the upside is, it may be the case that employers who had to shift to totally remote might actually still be doing some of that stuff, or at least be open to it. So I think in some ways, particularly if you're interviewing in multiple markets and that kind of thing, I think it could end up giving you more flexibility in a way, because they may be more open to doing, say, like the first round interview remotely, whereas before you've had to fly across the country for something like that.
Yeah, I think employers have actually realized the advantage to doing things remotely and the cost savings.
Right.
Yeah.
So, as with anything, I think you just have to kind of assess the situation and think about, like, all right, of the connections I have made, how can I strengthen those connections, whether it's through a phone call to a professor that liked you, or, whatever. And then think about where are the gaps and how can I start to fill those gaps in a way that makes sense. But like you said, a lot of people are in the same boat, and I think we're all still having to be flexible.
Absolutely. And talk to the other people who are in the same situation and ask what they're doing. Brainstorm with other people. I feel like that's, a way to sort of start connecting.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, this one definitely requires some flexibility. I did a 2L summer job at a law firm and I got the offer. I accepted it. I was really excited to start. And the firm went under, and now I'm left without a job when I graduate. What do I do now?
Well, first of all, this is really unfortunate. But again, you're not alone. There are going to be people in this situation for sure. I would say that remember that people understand that this is a hard situation. You don't need to hide this. You didn't do anything wrong. No one is going to blame you for something that was completely out of your control. And especially if you got the offer, you can put that on your resume. You are going to start. I think that's a great place to start, is just coming from a place of, okay, this happened. What do I do? And to be honest, people are going to kind of feel sorry for you. And I think you can, use that to your advantage. I'd also say, network within the groups at the firm that went under. And so especially if you were working with a certain group or even just, had a mentor or relationship, see where they're going. A lot of times in these situations, whole groups go to other firms and they sometimes have the opportunity to take a summer, somebody who's going to start with them. So I think there might be opportunities just to kind of sneak in there and not have to do a whole job search. That's definitely the first place I would start. And then after that, I would say, okay, I didn't expect to be in this situation. I'm a 3L now. I didn't think I'd be in the 3L market, but what do I do? And you're really just doing a 3L search like we've talked about before. You may not have this all locked in as quick as you wanted to. A lot of places need to wait and see, how many people are accepting and what their class size is going to be for incoming associates. So, unfortunately, you may be in limbo longer than you expected, but I think don't panic. It is all going to be okay. There's lots of options. I'd also look at clerkships or things that can kind of be in between type jobs. And there may be a possibility for those. So I would get a little creative.
Right. I think definitely if you can find a clerkship and this is something professors might be able to help out with if they happen to know someone, or, new judges are being appointed all the time. So that's something you can actually track and see if you have any possible connections there. Maybe they went to your school or something and you can reach out and, maybe kind of sneak into a clerkship that way. I mean, I think people get caught up in this idea that there's one path forward, and if you get off of that pathway, everything is over. It's the end of your career, and that's just not true. There's a lot of flexibility, particularly in a situation like this, particularly in this type of market where this is relatively rare, thankfully, at the moment. If we look at the recession, this was pretty common, right?
Right. And then the market was kind of overloaded with a lot of people who thought they had jobs and were really well qualified, and in any other situation would have already had a job. But major law firms went under then with huge summer classes. So I think it was, a lot worse than it is now, where there may be the occasional here or there kind of thing, or some places might just be scaling back, not doing as well as they would have. So I think you definitely have the advantage of that the market's not saturated with 3Ls.
And do you think in a scenario like this, it would make any sense to reach out to specific firms, maybe that gave you an offer that you didn't accept or something, or just that you're really interested in, and just see if they might be open to taking one more person?
Absolutely. I think there's no downside to that except that it would take some of your time. So I think, reach back to networking that you did before, any kind of connections. And again, I think tell this sob story about what happened.
I'm thinking they might be sympathetic and be we really did like that person. And we wish they had taken our offer, and they probably wish they'd taken our offer too. But, maybe they would be open to at least considering taking you on. I feel if you had 10 offers you turned down or something, one of those might be what, actually, we will talk to you about this.
And I think you're going to be looked at really differently as somebody who, said you got an offer at this other firm and they went under versus, I got an offer at another firm, just want to see what else is out there,
I didn't
what's
like
better.
It. They didn't like me. Yeah, in this case, like you said, you're basically blameless here.
Yeah.
And people are going to be sympathetic. And I think, in a fairly strong economy, you should be able to find a place to land, even if there's going to be probably some stress and a few bumps along the way.
Yeah, I think the key here is just to be flexible, not get too bogged down with how things were supposed to go and how they didn't go, and just kind of like, you got to roll with the punches here.
Yeah, and maybe, find a therapist that you can talk to about how frustrated you are and how unfair all of this is, which is all true, but probably not the most helpful mindset for moving forward.
Yeah, and I would say, like we've talked about before, deal with those feelings. So there's no way that it's coming out in other ways you may not realize, like in an interview or, in a networking lunch with someone or something.
Right, because you want to make sure you don't sound entitled in the scenario or anything like that. So you want to kind of practice too, like how you're going to explain this and, just that, well, this is unfortunate, but you didn't see it coming and, shit happens.
Also, don't badmouth the firm that went under. There's no need for that.
Yeah, I think everyone, just should just be an unfortunate, unforeseen situation that you're dealing with. And, you had a great time there. Everyone's fantastic. This is just something that happened and now you are where you are.
Exactly. Stay positive, look to the future.
Yeah, no need to blame anyone. You can do that, offline with your friends and and your therapist. All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit. I'm going to be starting law school in the fall. What career type things can I do now, if any, to get myself on the right track? And when would be a good time to start getting career help as a 1L? I mean, what can I do from the very beginning to set myself up for success?
I love this question. I think it's great to start early with, with all of this, because I think the thing to remember is most people go to law school to become a lawyer and get a job. And so it's not just about, how are your classes going? Are you keeping up with your work? It's about more than that. So I think thinking about it from the very beginning is great. I also think don't put too much pressure on yourself from the beginning, so you can kind of, keep it casual in terms of what you're putting into it. I would say, make sure you have a good resume that's, done going into law school, and then you can add to it. And obviously it may change and you may change the style, but I would say look up some kind of law student resumes, lawyer resumes. I also think that aside from having your resume set, you may want to kind of think about networking going into it, finding out about different legal paths, different ways you can go between law firms or public interest or, starting your own practice. Talk to people who maybe have careers that look interesting to you and figure out what their path was, because that might help you figure out, some jobs along the way as you're, going through school. I think that's great. I would say if you want outside help in terms of, thinking about getting ready for the job search, if you're a 1L, I wouldn't do it right away because I think you should give yourself some time to adjust. But I would say maybe kind of a late fall, early winter. A lot of applications kind of start around December 1 is the absolute earliest. So I think, I wouldn't be looking to talk to anyone before November. I'd really want you focusing on school until then. But I think it is great to start thinking about it like November, December, so that you're not in the situation like we talked about earlier where it's late spring and you don't have a job. I think if you plan ahead and have a plan for getting all your applications out as a 1L, kind of during winter break time, you probably will come out okay. You've, done enough applications then that hopefully you'll have a job in the winter and you can focus in the spring, just on school and just have that pressure off. So I think that would be kind of my advice for someone thinking about going into 1L year.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider during that first semester is whether there are any 1L fellowships for the summer that you need to apply for. So oftentimes the deadlines on things like public interest scholarships and things come during that first semester. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of that, because that might be might be a way that you can actually get paid for some of your work as opposed to not, which is pretty common as a 1L.
I think that's great advice. And I would say you want to be, one of the people who applies to it early.
Right.
Because, that's generally going to work out better for you to get seen earlier.
Yeah, I think just be aware of what those deadlines are, because I do recall that some of them came up much faster than people were expecting. And then people were kind of running around, oh my gosh, do I have a resume? What am I going to say in my, statement I have to do? in ways that just weren't all that helpful and caused a lot of stress.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you can give yourself sort of months to do a little bit at a time of something versus a day or two or a week, which I think is where I see a lot of people where something is due and they really haven't thought about it. So there's just not a lot of pressure if you have months to sort of think about this and prepare for it. And then you can kind of slot it in with, your schoolwork and other things that are obviously really important.
Yeah, but definitely get that resume together over the summer so that anytime an opportunity arises, you will just be ready to go.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to have the basis of the resume and just add things in, or edit things a little bit at a time versus having to start fresh, I think is always overwhelming to people.
Right. And the first time you go to career services, they're probably going to ask for your resume. So you may as well just have it. And they may have thoughts on it, but, they're not going to do it for you from scratch.
Exactly. No one is going to do that for you.
No, definitely not. All right. Well, let's finish up with a few questions that apply to kind of anyone across the spectrum. I'm not getting a lot of traction in my job search, and it's getting frustrating. What can I do to stay optimistic and start making progress?
Well, first of all, I really feel for you because I think the job search is frustrating and it's a hard process and no one really enjoys, getting rejected and having to write lots of cover letters. And I think it just gets draining as it sort of moves along. And I think people, definitely lose hope and that's totally normal. What I would say is don't be defensive. If you're asking for help, you kind of have to really be open to the feedback that you're getting without taking it personally. Because if something's not working, then there's probably a lot of different angles and other people might have suggestions. It might just be, oh, I see something, on your resume, or it's not really telling the story that you're telling me that you're trying to convey. So it might be, that simple. It may be something going on in the interview. So maybe you want to practice interviewing with somebody and see what feedback you're getting. Again, I think it can be really hard to hear that feedback, especially if you look back and think, oh, I've been doing this the whole time, and you feel embarrassed about it. Someone says you've been doing something that's coming across, not exactly right this whole time. I would say don't focus on whatever already happened. It's like you have a typo on your resume, you submitted it to a bunch of places. You just fix it and it'll be right going forward. There's no point in beating yourself up about it, but I also think you need to have an open mind. So I basically say you need to take a different tack at this point if something's not going right. And it may also be a strategy thing. It may be you're not applying, to the right area of jobs, or, this part of the economy isn't doing as well. So you have to be more open to other things. So there's a lot of different things that you can change, but I really think you probably need some kind of outside help at this point if you've been doing it a while and it's not going well.
Yeah, I think if it's not working, you've got to change something. And I think one thing that can be a little challenging here is sometimes people tend to take feedback really personally, like you said, and they realize maybe, oh gosh, I did do that in this last interview. And then it's kind of this shame spiral of oh, I'm a total idiot. How could I have done that? I'm never going to get a job. And that's not really productive. If somebody asks you, well, what have you done so far? That's not a personal attack. They're just kind of asking you what you've done so they can maybe think of things that you could do going forward. And I think it's easy to take that as well, what do you mean, what have I done? I've done everything I possibly could do. What are you implying with that? And I just don't think that's productive.
I totally agree. But I think it is a really common reaction. So also, if you have that reaction, I think what's great is to kind of step back and say, wait, why am I feeling this way? Really ask yourself, what's my initial reaction to them saying that, And if it's shame, that's okay. A lot of people would feel that. But then you have to say, okay, what can I do, right, going forward? And you can deal with those feelings, but also don't let it, negate what someone tells you that might be actually helpful.
Yeah, I think it's this balance. You've got to kind of be open to the feedback while also dealing with all of the stuff that probably comes up because you do feel like you're being rejected, which objectively, I mean, you kind of are. So it's not a crazy sensation to feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think any job search is going to involve a lot of rejection. That's just the nature of what this is. And like I've said, you have to send out a lot of applications. So, most of them are going to be no's most of the time. And that's really hard. But, that's something that happens in life. So it's good to be able to deal with it. Not everything works out.
Right. Exactly. I mean, you're not going to win every case as a lawyer either or close every deal. So, you got to take the good with the bad here. All right.
Exactly.
I don't feel like I'm getting great advice from my career services office, but I don't have a lot of other resources I can trust. How can I figure out if what they're saying really makes sense for my scenario?
I hear this a lot. Students complain about their career services. And I'm not saying that sometimes it's probably not warranted and things aren't going well, but I think students tend to probably take some things they don't want to hear in the wrong way from career services or kind of give career services a hard time for things that, are out of their control. Like they only have so much time they can spend with you, or there's only so much they can offer because they have a lot of students on their plate. So I think the thing to remember is career services is there to help you. That is their job. And I think developing a relationship with them early is great. Having them get to know you so that, you don't feel like you're just running in there when you're desperate. At the end of your job search, you haven't found anything. And so all of a sudden you're going in there, because I think that's probably not the best way to go into it with them. Kind of like you really need something from them quick. And all of a sudden you want to have a relationship with them. So I think like building it early is helpful. I'd also, just like the question we had before, ask yourself, am I taking this personally or being defensive about something they're saying that's going to be helpful? They're the ones with the connections. They're the ones that know, what places have openings and last minute opportunities and things like that. So I think generally career services is really helpful. And I would just take whatever I could from what they're saying that's going to help me. And if you don't like everything they're saying, you can leave some of it. You don't need to worry about it. You don't have to do every single thing exactly like they say. I think you can, possibly ask for other help or resources outside of them and kind of run it by other people and see what they think. But I think generally they are helpful and they have your best interests at heart.
And sometimes they are just the bearer of bad news. Like, I'm sorry, this job is probably not that realistic for you right now. And people can get upset about that, but that's just sometimes kind of the reality.
I also think they appreciate it when you go in with some kind of plan or, have researched and done some work on your own. I think it's not that helpful if you're just like, I have no idea what I want. I just need a job.
I need a job.
Yeah, they don't like that.
It's like, okay, like at McDonald's, like what are you talking about here?
Like you need to have done some background research to figure out, what types of jobs are realistic. The other thing is I think students like reaching too far. I want BigLaw, but I have a C average. It's just not going to happen. Right. So going in with like realistic expectations and a plan, I think they'll help you tweak it, or they'll have some suggestions about where to apply. But just going in as a total blank slate, I don't think is like a good look.
Right. I agree. It's always it's always easier to help someone who's like, this is what I'm looking for. These are my materials. Like, this is where I've applied. This is where I'm thinking of applying. Like, how do you think I can shape that plan to be better? Or do you have any other ideas? Or could you look at this? Versus just, I need a job.
Yeah.
It's like, great. That's not what we do.
It's like what we said about you can't just not go with a resume and then expect them to create one for you. They'll help you edit it.
Yeah. No, I think you got to be realistic. All right. Last question. My parents keep telling me to change things on my resume, but they're not lawyers. They're doctors. Should I listen? Do they have any idea what they're talking about?
Well, I'd say it depends. Being a lawyer and law school resumes are really specific, and they're different than other professions, and kind of all professions are different. And so, what they're looking for, what they did before may be really different than what you need. On the other hand, I think it's nice to have a fresh eye sometimes that doesn't know, what direction you're going, or, how all the resumes looked like, with your classmates or anything like that. They're just looking fresh at your resume. And I think, asking them specifically for like help with typos or making sure that, the spacing is right, things like that, I think anyone can help you with. And I think what can also be good is to ask them, again, with a fresh eye, like what kind of story it's telling and how they view it from outside. What I don't think is helpful is, some parents can be sort of overly involved and, want to take over and a little bit controlling about it and kind of are so sure that they know how it's supposed to be. And I think in that case, you should, thank them for their help and get help somewhere else from somebody else and kind of know that they're too close to it or too close to you and they don't know enough about what you need, to really be helpful. And I don't think you have to be like mean about it. Again, I think just, thank you. They don't need to know how it all turned out either. So I think you kind of need to know what's your relationship with your parents, and how good they are at things like proofreading and, how detail oriented and stuff like that. But just remember that you do want someone ultimately to make sure that they've looked at it, who knows what legal resume should look like, and that they, should be really clear and concise and nothing out of the box.
Right. This is not a time to get creative. And I don't think it's particularly productive to sit down and be arguing with your parents over like, well, this is the template that my school gave me versus this is the template that I found on like another website. And they were like, no, none of these are correct. It should have it should be 4 pages long like my CV was when I'm an academic. It's like, that's not how this works,
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's a balance. They can always hire you somebody to work on it if they're really concerned about it. But at some point, I think this is part of separating as a grown-up from your parents. Like you've got to trust your own judgment and the advice you're getting from your school and other people who know what legal resumes look like and kind of go with that and not, take the advice of someone who's well-meaning but maybe actually doesn't know what they're talking about.
I totally agree.
All right. Well, we are about out of time here. Any final thoughts on these topics?
Well, I just remind everyone that, you're definitely not alone with all these issues. We kind of hear the same thing over and over again because they're just like common problems. And I think, the job search is draining for everyone. And know that you will get a job at the end of it, if you're putting the effort into it and keep trying. And there will be a break from all of this. So it's kind of about putting in the work now, for a payoff later.
Yeah, and I just always go back to so much of it being really a numbers game. Even someone who's at the very top of their class at like a very good school, they are not getting every job. They're not getting every callback. They're not even getting every interview. So in the reality is you really only need one thing to pan out. So it is a frustrating situation that you just have to kind of keep plugging away. But then when you get that one thing that does work out, it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that, we are out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.